What's good, everybody? Welcome back to Not a Movie Buff. If this is your first time checking out the show, I appreciate you pulling up. And if you've been here all season, you already know the vibe. This is a space where we talk movies without turning it into homework. No lectures, no film school breakdowns, no pretending that there's only one right way to enjoy a movie. Just honest conversations about movies and how they actually land with us. Today's episode is one that I have been looking forward to. All year long, I've been watching movies the same way that I always do. Sometimes I'm excited, sometimes I may be skeptical, but I'm always just there for the ride. Some surprised me, some didn't hit the way I hoped, and some they did stick with me longer than I expected. And as the year started wrapping up, I realized that the movies that stayed with me weren't always about perfection, but they were about enjoyment. That's what this episode is. This isn't about what was technically the best or awards or consensus. It's about movies that I personally enjoyed the most this year. That's really the heart of this podcast. I'm not here to convince anyone that their taste is wrong. And I'm not here to rank movies like there's some universal scorecard we all have to follow. Movies hit differently depending on your mood or expectations, the timing, and where you're at in your life when you watch them. That's what matters. Some of these movies that I watched, they worked for me because they were fun, and some of them surprised me. Some of them reminded me why I love movies in the first place. That's enough. So as we go through this list, just know that this isn't me trying to make a statement or prove anything. It's just a snapshot of my year at the movies, the stuff that I enjoyed, the moments that stuck with me, and the films that I had the best time with. So, without further ado, let's get into it, y'all. My top 10 movies of 2025. Kicking off this list at number 10 is Thunderbolts. And I already know, this is one of those movies where reactions are all over the place. Some people, they really connected with it. Some people bounced off of it hard. And me, I'm in the middle of it. I'm leaning more towards appreciation than love, if that makes sense. Let me explain. Going into Thunderbolts, I wasn't excited at all. Not because I hate the characters, but because the movie never felt necessary to me. The lineup didn't scream must see, and it felt like one of those MCU projects that exists more because it can than because it had something urgent to say. So my expectations were pretty low, and honestly, that helped. What Thunderbolts does well is character work. The movie is very clearly about damaged people trying to function together. Everybody in this group is carrying something: guilt, regret, trauma, insecurity, and the film leans into that hard, sometimes too hard. There are moments that felt like I was watching a group therapy session with superpowers, and while I get the intent, it slowed the movie down more than it needed to. That being said, there are some real highlights. Yelena continues to be one of the strongest characters Marvel's introduced in recent years. She brings personality, sarcasm, and emotional weight without feeling forced. Bucky, solid as always. He's at his best when the movie lets him be quiet and reflective instead of trying to turn him into comic relief. Red Guardian adds some humor, but not in an over-the-top way that breaks the tone. The issue for me is that the movie never fully commits to being fun or being heavy. It's stuck in the middle. When it's emotional, it works, and when it's action-focused, it works. But when it tries to juggle both at the same time, the pacing suffers. I never felt bored, but I also never felt fully locked in. And for a team-up movie, the action just didn't hit like it should have. There are good moments, but nothing that made me sit up and think, yeah, okay, this is why this movie needed to exist. A Thunderbolts movie should feel dangerous and unpredictable, unhinged. And while the tone was darker, the energy never fully matched the concept. That being said, I didn't necessarily walk away disappointed. I just was like, okay, and sometimes that's enough. Thunderbolts earned its spot on this list because I enjoyed it more than I expected to. I may have walked away like, man, okay, but I was expecting to dislike it. It didn't bring anything to the table to me. I enjoyed it not because it's amazing or revolutionary, but because it had enough solid character moments and emotional grounding to keep me engaged. It's not a movie that I'm rushing to rewatch, but it's not one that I regret watching either. And for a movie I went into with almost zero excitement, that counts. That's why Thunderbolts lands at number 10. Coming in at number 9 is A Working Man. And honestly, this movie is here for one very simple reason. I had a good time watching it, y'all. That's it. There's no sort of deep analysis, overthinking, pretending if something is not. This is a Jason Statham movie, plain and simple. It knows exactly what lane it's in. You press play, knowing what you're about to get. grounded action, a quiet lead character who's clearly capable of violence, and a story that exists mainly to justify him beating the stuffing out of people who deserve it. And you know what? That works for me. What I appreciated most about A Working Man is that it doesn't waste time. There's no drawn out setup, no unnecessary world building, or trying to be clever or subversive. The movie, it introduces the situation, establishes who this guy is, and then lets the action do the talking. Jason Statham doesn't need a long monologue to convince you he's dangerous. His presence does that immediately. Now, is this movie doing anything new? No, not at all, but it doesn't need to. Sometimes you just want a straightforward action movie where the stakes are clear and the hero isn't confused about what needs to be done. There's something refreshing about that, especially in a year full of movies that feel like they're trying to say five different things at once. A Working Man stays focused. The action itself is solid. It's not flashy or superhero level and not trying to top itself every 10 minutes. It's grounded, physical, believable, which fits the character perfectly. You never feel like you're watching CGI nonsense. It feels like real punches and impacts real consequences. What keeps this movie from ranking higher is that it doesn't linger. Once it's over, it's over. I enjoyed it while I was watching it, but it didn't stick with me days later. It's not a movie I'm quoting or replaying scenes from or recommending with passion. It's just a solid watch that did its job. And honestly, that's enough. Not every movie needs to change your life. Some movies just need to entertain you for a couple of hours, and A Working Man absolutely did that for me. I didn't regret the time spent watching it, and I'd probably throw it on again if I caught it playing. That's why it lands at number 9. Simple, effective, enjoyable. All right, y'all. At number 8, we have Fantastic Four First Steps. And I'm not exaggerating when I say this movie had a lot riding on it for me personally. I have been waiting my entire life for a Fantastic Four movie that actually works. Not one that's okay for what it is, or one that's the absolute worst superhero movie I've ever seen. I mean, a movie that understands who these characters are and why they matter. Because the truth is, the Fantastic Four should be one of the easiest teams to get right. And somehow Hollywood, they just kept missing. So when this movie finally dropped, my expectations were cautious but hopeful. And for the most part, it delivered. This is the first Fantastic Four movie that actually feels like the Fantastic Four. The family dynamic is there. The tone isn't embarrassed of the source material. The movie leans into the idea that these characters are explorers first and superheroes second, and that makes a huge difference. It finally understands that Reed, Sue, Johnny, and Ben, they aren't meant to feel dark and gritty all the time. They're supposed to feel curious, human, and connected. The casting, it works. All 4 leads feel believable together, and that chemistry carries the movie through some of its weaker moments. Reed, in particular, he feels like a thinker again, someone whose intelligence actually drives the story instead of just being mentioned in dialogue. Sue gets more to do emotionally. Johnny brings personality without being annoying, and Ben finally feels like the thing. That said, it's not a perfect movie. The action's inconsistent. Some sequences work really well, and others feel smaller than they should. And while I appreciated the restraint, there are moments where I wanted the movie to lean harder into the spectacle. This is the Fantastic Four. They should feel larger than life at times, and the movie occasionally plays it a little too safe. Moman specifically deserved better. He's nothing like he is in the comics, and I'm not a fan of what they did to change him in the MCU. My only hope is that when they actually get to the main universe, because this was set in a different universe in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, it's not set in the main timeline that we know and love, but when they hopefully introduce them and bring Mole Man, he's the actual Mole Man, because I'm not here for this one, and I really am not interested in seeing him in the future. But here's the thing. Even with those issues, I walked out satisfied because for the first time, I wasn't embarrassed watching a Fantastic Four movie. I wasn't cringing at the tone or frustrated by the characterization. I wasn't wondering why the movie existed. I finally felt like I'd seen the foundation for something that could grow into something great. This movie earns a spot on the list not because it's flawless, but because it got the most important thing right: identity. It understands who these characters are and what makes them special, and after years of misfires, that alone is worth celebrating. Fantastic Four First Steps didn't change cinema at all, but it gave me hope, and honestly, that's more than what I've been able to say about this franchise for a very long time. All right, so landing at number 7, Wake Up Dead Man. And honestly, this movie reminded me why I enjoy a good mystery when it's done right. I like mysteries that don't rush you. I like when a movie trusts you enough to let the pieces sit on the table for a bit instead of constantly yelling, "Look over here." This one takes its time, and for the most part, it works in its favor. I'll be completely honest, y'all. I figured out who the killer was really early on. And normally that would hurt a movie like this, but in this case, it didn't. Because the real fun wasn't just about who did it, it was about watching the story unfold, seeing how everyone fit into the bigger picture, and catching all the little character moments along the way. Daniel Craig is completely locked into his role at this moment. Benoit Blanc doesn't feel like a gimmick anymore. He feels like a fully realized character. The accent, the mannerisms, the way he observes people without saying much, it all feels natural now. He carries the movie without overpowering it, which is exactly what a good detective character should do. What I appreciated most about Wake Up Dead Man is how much personality it has. Every character feels distinct, nobody blends together. Even the people who don't get a ton of screen time still leave an impression, and that's important in a mystery where the cast matters just as much as the plot. The writing is sharp, but not annoying. It doesn't feel like it's trying to outsmart the audience every 5 minutes. Instead, it lets the story play out and trusts you to keep up. And when the reveals happen, they make sense. Nothing feels random or pulled out of thin air just for shock value. Where this movie loses a few points for me is in the tension. Because I clocked the answer early, the suspense never fully peaked. I was more curious than anxious, more entertained than on edge. And that's fine, it just keeps it from climbing higher on my list. Still, I enjoyed watching it. I was engaged the entire time. I never felt bored, and I didn't walk away feeling like I wasted any time. For a mystery, that's honestly the bare minimum, and something not every movie manages to pull off. Wake Up Dead Man earns its spot here because it's smart, well acted, and fun without being exhausting. It's the kind of movie you can rewatch and still enjoy even when you already know the answers. And sometimes, that's exactly what you want. Sliding in at number 6 is The Bad Guys 2. And y'all, I really already knew this was going to be on my top 10 list. The first Bad Guys was already better than it had any right to be. It was funny, stylish, had an animation style that immediately stood out. So, going into the sequel, my biggest concern was whether it could justify existing without just redoing the same tricks. And surprisingly, it did. The biggest strength of The Bad Guys is confidence. This movie knows exactly what kind of world it's in and leans into it without hesitation. The animation is even bolder this time around. The mix of 2D and 3D elements feels sharper, more intentional, and expressive. There were moments where I caught myself paying more attention to how the movie looked than what was happening, and that's not a bad thing. It's visually creative in a way a lot of animated films aren't willing to be. Story wise, the sequel expands the stakes without losing the fun. The characters are more comfortable in who they are now, and the movie plays with that. You get more layers, more tension, and a little more emotional weight, but never enough to drag the pace down. It still moves fast, still jokes constantly, and still understands that its main job is to entertain. What really impressed me was how the movie handled its twists. I didn't see all of them coming, and that's rare for animated sequels. It kept me guessing without getting convoluted, and the payoff actually felt earned instead of rushed. The ending in particular sets up something bigger without feeling like a cliffhanger designed purely to sell the next movie. Where The Bad Guys 2 really shines, though, is tone. It walks that line between being kid friendly and genuinely enjoyable for adults. The humor isn't dumbed down, the dialogue is sharp, and the characters still feel cool without trying too hard to be cool. That balance is difficult, and this movie pulls it off smoothly. The reason it doesn't crack the top 5 comes down to impact. I had a great time watching it, but it didn't stay with me long after. It's a movie I'd absolutely rewatch, especially if it's on in the background or if someone else puts it on, but it didn't hit that emotional or thematic level that pushes a movie into the upper tier of this list. Still, that doesn't take away from how solid it is. The Bad Guys 2 earns its spot here because it does exactly what a sequel should do: build on what worked, take a few creative risks, and still feel fun from start to finish. It's stylish, entertaining, and surprisingly smart. And for an animated sequel, that is absolutely a win. Coming in at number 5 is Sinners. And I already know how this placement is going to probably raise a few eyebrows, especially with how much love this movie got across the board. But let me be very clear up front. This is not me saying that Sinners is bad. I promise it's not. It's a really good movie with strong performances, a solid story, and a cast that absolutely showed up. Michael B. Jordan did his thing. Absolutely, no question. The acting across the board was strong, the tension was there, the movie knew exactly the type of tone that it was going for. But for me, it didn't hit the way it hit for everybody else. Part of that is genre. I've never been a huge horror guy. In this movie, you've got the atmosphere, which is heavy, and themes that are dark. The movie takes its time sitting in that discomfort. I respect it. I just didn't love being there the entire runtime. Another thing working against it for me was the hype. By the time I finally watched Sinners, expectations were through the roof. People were calling it groundbreaking, saying it was one of the best films of the year, hyping up moments like they were going to change lives. And while the movie absolutely delivers quality, it didn't deliver that wow moment for me. Now, that doesn't make the praise wrong, but it just means that my experience was different. Where the movie really shines is in its themes. There's a lot being said here about guilt, morality, choices, and consequences, and none of it feels shallow. The movie trusts the audience to sit with uncomfortable ideas instead of spelling everything out, and I respect that. It's a movie that wants you to feel uneasy, to question what you're watching, and to think about it after the credits roll. And to its credit, I did think about it afterward. I just didn't feel the urge to revisit it. That's really what separates the top five from everything below it on this list. These are the movies that stuck with me in some way, emotionally, mentally, or just in how much fun I had. Sinners earned this spot because it was impactful and well made, even if it wasn't something I personally connected with as deeply as others did. I appreciate it and I respect it. I'm glad I watched it, but I didn't love it the way that I love the movies above it. And that's okay. That's why Sinners lands at number five. Now, coming in hot at number four, Captain America Brave New World. And I'll be honest, a lot of the noise around this movie was extremely exhausting before it even came out. Some people decided how they felt about this movie the second that Sam Wilson picked up the shield, and that already told me everything I needed to know about those conversations. But stripping all that away and just focusing on the movie itself, I had a genuinely good time with this one. First and foremost, Sam Wilson works as Captain America. Point blank, period. Anthony Mackie brings a grounded, human energy to the role that feels intentional. This version of Cap isn't trying to replicate Steve Rogers, and that's exactly why it works. He's not a super soldier. He's not invincible. He's a man doing the best he can with the responsibility that he's been handed, and the movie actually leans into that instead of running from it. The action was solid, not over the top or cartoonish, just enough weight behind it to make things feel dangerous. Sam's fighting style is one of the coolest in the MCU because it's so different. The wings, the shield, the aerial combat, it all blends together in a way that feels fresh even this late into the franchise. Now, the movie isn't perfect. Marvel definitely fumbled the marketing by revealing Red Hulk ahead of time. That should have been a moment, a real oh my goodness reveal, like you should be hyped as can be just to see it in theaters. Instead, it became something people were waiting for rather than reacting to. And the leader was disgusting. The character felt undercooked. The payoff, it just wasn't worth the buildup. But here's where the movie wins me over. Replay value. I enjoyed this movie more each time I watched it. Once the internet noise faded and I could just sit with it, I appreciated what it was trying to do. It wasn't trying to reinvent Captain America. It was trying to establish Sam as his own version of the symbol, and that matters. There's also something refreshing about a superhero movie that isn't trying to end the world. The stakes feel personal. The conflicts feel grounded. The movie doesn't forget that at its core, Captain America is about responsibility, integrity, and stepping up when you're not sure you're ready. That's why this movie climbed higher on my list, not because it's flawless or because it's loud, but because it works, and it works more than people give it credit for. Captain America Brave New World earned this spot by being solid, thoughtful, and surprisingly rewatchable. And for me, that counts for a lot. All right, y'all, my number three movie of 2025, Karate Kid Legends. And honestly, I didn't see this one coming at all. I went into this movie with very normal expectations. Not low, not high, just neutral. The Karate Kid franchise has been around forever, and between the original movies, the reboot, and Cobra Kai, it's easy to feel like everything that needs to be said has already been said. So I wasn't expecting this to hit me the way it did. But y'all, it did. What Karate Kid Legends gets right immediately is respect for the legacy. This movie doesn't treat the past like something it needs to escape from, and it doesn't treat it like a crutch either. It understands that the heart of this franchise has always been about mentorship, discipline, and growth, not just fighting, and it builds everything around that idea. Jackie Chan was a huge part of why this worked for me. He brings a calm, grounded presence that fits perfectly with the tone of the story. His version of mentorship feels earned, not flashy or over-explained, just lived in. You believe this guy's been doing this for a long time, and when he speaks, it carries weight. The newer characters also hold their own. The journey feels intentional. You see the growth and the struggle. And even when the beat feels familiar, the movie doesn't feel lazy about it. I know it's working within a formula, but it still finds ways to make that formula feel fresh. The fight choreography deserves real credit too. The action is clean, readable, and purposeful. It's not trying to be flashy for the sake of it. Every fight tells part of the story. You understand why people are fighting, not just that they are, and that's something a lot of modern movies forget. Now, let's be honest. The final move is predictable. You know it's coming. You can feel it building. But here's the thing. Predictability isn't always a bad thing. Sometimes it's about execution, and this movie sticks to landing. The payoff feels earned because the journey earned it. I wasn't rolling my eyes, I was locked in. What really pushed this movie into the top three for me is how good it felt to watch. It reminded me why franchises matter when they're handled with care, and that sometimes a movie doesn't need to surprise you to be effective. It just needs to connect. Karate Kid Legends stayed with me after it was over. I kept thinking about it and replaying moments, and that's when I knew it earned its spot. That's why Karate Kid Legends lands at number 3. All right, y'all, swinging in at number 2, we've got Zootopia 2, and this one didn't land here by accident. I'm not going to redo a full breakdown on this one because I already gave its own dedicated review. If you want my complete thoughts, the story, the characters, what worked, what didn't, that episode's already up and ready for you. I'm not here to make you listen to the same conversation twice. For this list, though, Zootopia 2 earned this spot because of how consistently enjoyable it was. It's funny from beginning to end, not just a couple jokes here and there. The humor stays sharp the whole time. The characters feel comfortable in their roles without feeling stale, and the movie knows exactly what kind of story it wants to tell. It doesn't rush or over-explain, and doesn't forget that it's supposed to be entertaining first. What really pushed it this high for me is how well it balances everything. It has something to say, but it never turns into a lecture. It respects the world that was built in the first movie without trying to outdo it or replace it. And most importantly, I walked out feeling more than satisfied. I wasn't exhausted or disappointed or thinking about what could have been done. That matters. Zootopia 2 stuck with me. I find myself thinking about it afterwards, still replaying moments and appreciating the small details. And that's always a sign that a movie did its job. So yeah, if you want the full breakdown, go check out the review episode. But for this list, just know that this movie absolutely earned its place at the top. Now, before we get to the number one spot, y'all, I need to pause for a second and give a quick honorable mention. And I want to be clear about this up front. This movie is not ranked. It's not sitting above or below anything on this list. It just deserves to be talked about. Diary of a Wimpy Kid, The Last Straw, caught me off guard. I didn't go into it expecting much. These movies live and die by nostalgia, and usually that's a dangerous thing. But this one actually worked for me, and a big reason why is the animation style. Going animated was the right call. It fits the tone of the books way better than live action ever did, and it lets the humor land without feeling awkward or forced. What I appreciated most is how faithful it felt. The movie doesn't try to modernize things too hard or reinvent the wheel. It understands the books and the humor, and that Greg Heffley is supposed to be a little annoying. That's the point. The situations are relatable in that exaggerated middle school way, and it plays into that without going overboard. This is one of those movies where I didn't think about rankings or lists while watching it. I just enjoyed it. I laughed. I stayed engaged. And when it was over, I felt like it did exactly what it set out to do. That's why it gets mentioned here. Not because it's better than the movies already on the list or because it belongs in a countdown, but because it was a genuinely fun movie that deserves its moment. And with that being said, now we can move on to the number one movie at the top of my list, Superman. Y'all, this was not a hard decision for me at all. I've been waiting my entire life for a Superman movie that actually felt like Superman, one that came out during my lifetime. Not just the powers, not just the costume, not just a symbol, but the spirit, the optimism, the idea that being powerful doesn't mean being cold, angry, or detached from humanity. This movie finally understood that. From jump, this version of Superman feels approachable. He's strong but not distant. He's hopeful, a little naive, but most importantly, he feels like someone who genuinely wants to help people, not because it's his job, but because it's who he is. That balance is incredibly hard to pull off, and this movie nails it. David Cornsweet was the perfect choice. He doesn't play Superman like a god pretending to be human. He plays him like a human who happens to be extraordinary. There's warmth in his performance, restraint when it's needed, and confidence without arrogance. It never feels like he's trying to sell you on the character. He just is the character. The tone of this movie is what really locked it in for me, though, y'all. This felt like a live-action DC animated universe movie. If you grew up on Justice League or Justice League Unlimited, you have an idea of what I'm talking about. The world feels heroic without being cheesy and serious without being bleak. It understands that hope can be compelling without being corny. And that's where so many Superman movies have stumbled. They either lean too hard into realism and drain the joy out of the character, or they lean too hard into spectacle and forget who Superman is supposed to be at its core. This movie finds the middle ground and it stays there confidently. The supporting cast deserves a lot of credit too. Nobody feels wasted or like they're there to just set something else up. Mr. Terrific, especially, he stood out and I can't wait to see what they have for him in the future. Every scene he was in added something, whether it was intelligence, humor, or presence. It didn't feel like a teaser. He actually felt like part of the story. And that's something that I really appreciated. This movie isn't obsessed with setting up a dozen other projects. It's focused on telling the story first. It trusts that if you get the foundation right, the rest will come naturally. And that mindset shows in every decision the film makes. What pushed Superman to the top of my list wasn't just how good it was, it's how it made me feel. I left the theater feeling energized and hopeful. I felt excited about the future of DC in a way I haven't in a long time. That matters. Movies can be technically impressive and still forgettable. This one wasn't. It reminded me why Superman matters, why he's endured for generations, why he's more than just a guy who can fly and punch hard. He represents the idea that power should come with compassion, that strength doesn't require cruelty, that hope isn't weakness. And in a year full of great movies, this is the one that stayed with me the most. And that's why Superman is my number one movie of 2025. So that's my list, y'all. Again, my top 10 movies of 2025. Not the greatest movies ever made, not the most critically acclaimed, just the ones that I enjoyed the most this year. If your list looks different, that's perfectly fine. Movies hit differently depending on where you are, what you connect with, and what you're looking for when you sit down to actually watch something. That's the whole reason this show exists, to talk about movies honestly without pretending there's one right answer. If you've enjoyed this episode, make sure you're subscribed to the podcast and following Not a Movie Buff wherever you listen. It really does help the show grow and it lets more people find these conversations. Now, the season 1 finale drops this Thursday, December 18th, and I'm closing the season out with something I've been looking forward to. My most anticipated movies of 2026. The films I'm already excited for, the ones on my radar, and the movies I think could end up dominating next year. You don't want to miss it. As always, y'all, it was a pleasure to go through this with you. I may not be a movie buff, but I'll see you at the movies.